Please make welcome Mark Twain.
I played golf once with Woodrow Wilson down in Bermuda. And I remember his turning to me on that beautiful fairway and saying, "Sam, good sportsmanship is not picking up lost golf balls while they're still rolling." I had a pocket full of them, yes. Steve. Thank you, right, wait, the pipe. Steve, thank you. That knocked the spots out on any music I ever heard. I'll be in a good mood for a week. A record for me. Thank you, Steve. Wow. Isla tells me we have some historians with us this evening. People tell me I'm a historian, where facts are not essential. And I understand we have some educators with us this evening. I must confess to you, I have no formal education. In truth, I am as unlettered as the backside of a tombstone. But I've gained worlds of knowledge at second hand, none of it correct. Now, all you need for success in this life is ignorance and confidence. And then success is sure. My father died when I was 11. I had to go to work in the printing shop. So the printing shop became my high school, the steamboat my university. I'll never let my schooling interfere with my education. So I wrote to my brother in 1866, "I have had a call to literature of a low order, humorous, to excite the mirth of God's creatures." Now you might be wondering how Mark Twain got all the way from the Mississippi River to Nevada. I'm going to tell you, if I can remember. You see, I was piloting on the river when we first learned that South Carolina had gone out of the Union. This was in December of 1860. And by the summer of 61, the first wash of the wave of war broke upon the shores of Missouri. I took the last boat up out of New Orleans after the fall of Fort Sumter. Well, 15 of us gathered together in a secret place by night and formed ourselves into a military company, the Marian Rangers. I arrived riding a small yellow donkey, so small my feet touched the ground on both sides, and he was able to bend around and bite me on the legs. I was carrying a skillet, a squirrel gun, and an open umbrella to keep the sun off. They made me second lieutenant. We had no first lieutenant, I don't know why. Well, for a while, life was idly delicious. There was nothing to mar it, until some farmers brought the alarm one day. They said it was rumored that the enemy was approaching over Hyde's Prairie. Well, this brought sharp and general consternation. So in the confusion, we did not know which way to retreat. Captain Lyman had some calming words, however. He said, "Inasmuch as the enemy is approaching over Hyde's Prairie, our course is simple. All we need to do is not to retreat towards him. Any other direction will answer our needs perfectly." Well, Captain Lyman received a great many compliments. He said to protect the camp from surprise, we should post a picket. So I ordered Sergeant Bowers to go out to Hyde's Prairie and post a picket until midnight. He said he wouldn't go on account of the weather. So I ordered the others to go. They said they wouldn't go in any kind of weather. So for the next 2 weeks, we learned more about retreating than the man who invented retreating. I was incapacitated from retreating. And in that little time, that 2 weeks, the desire to kill people to whom I had not been introduced had passed away. So I seceded from the secession. Well, the unget-aroundable fact is I was missing in action before a shot was fired. Some said I was too irregular, even for the irregulars. But as good fortune would have it, my brother had been appointed secretary to Territorial Governor Nye out in the Silverland, Nevada. So I fancied myself to be secretary to the secretary. And I purchased a $150 fare each on the Overland stagecoach out of St. Joe. And out we came at a spanking gait with our 6 shooters, a deck of cards, and a 6-pound unabridged Webster's dictionary. We should have left it behind. It wasn't a good dictionary. It didn't have any modern words in it, only obsolete words that Noah Webster used when he was a child. Well, for example, it defined a carbuncle as a kind of a rare jewel. No, humor has no place in a dictionary. And every time we avalanched from one side of that stagecoach to the other, the dictionary came behind. And every time it came, it damaged somebody. Well, the first trip across, it barked Orion's elbow. Next time it came, it hurt me in the stomach area. And the third trip, it bent old Mr. Bemis's nose up to where he could look down his nostrils. No, I don't believe the dictionary has been any benevolence to society. It's a pretty uncreative mind that could not find more than one way to spell a word, don't you think? We entertained ourselves by playing 7-Up with a deck of cards that was so old and worn and greasy, you could read it from the backside better than you could the front side. I wore a Smith & Wesson 7-shooter. My brother Orion had a Navy Colt 6-shooter. But Mr. Bemis had the original pepper box, an Allen. All 6 chambers discharged at the same time. And when that happened, the only safe place in all the region was behind it. For if it didn't get what it was after, it'd fetch up something else. But you want to see a jackass rabbit get up and hump himself, that's the weapon you want, is the Allen. Well, 20 days on the Overland. Once we heard the thunder of hooves push back the flap, and there was the Pony Express galloping past, like a belated fragment of a storm. And so sudden was it all, and so like a flash of unreal fancy, that were it not for the flake of white foam left quivering and perishing on the mail sack, we might have been left in doubt as to whether we saw a pony and a rider at all. They were so fast. But imagine with me, if you will, we'd climb up on top of the box at dawn in our long johns, smoke our pipes and cigars, and watch the sunrise on the prairie. Even to this day, it thrills me to think of the wild sense of freedom that used to make the blood dance in our veins on those fine Overland mornings. And at last, we disembarked in the Silverland. This was in August of 1861. And back then, I have to tell you, Carson City was the most uninhabitable place on earth. Nothing grew there. Even the birds, when they flew over, carried their own provisions. But we hiked into the foothills and looked back on Carson, nestled in that flat sandy desert and surrounded by such prodigious mountains that they seemed to expand your soul until you felt yourself spreading into a colossus. And in that instant you were seized with a burning desire to stretch forth your hand, put Carson in your pocket, and walk off with it. It was beautiful, really. In exploring the sink, we traveled down the Carson River a ways. When one is accustomed to the monstrous, mile-wide Mississippi, he grows accustomed to associating the word river with a certain degree of watery grandeur. So when one stands on the shores of the Carson, he's disappointed. Well, one of the most vigorous forms of exercise one can contrive is to run and jump across the Carson until he's overheated, and then get down and drink it dry. No, it's a moist ditch, is what it is. If it were my river, I wouldn't leave it out of doors at night. And I could see I was going to need some transportation while in Carson City, so I attended an auction and bought a genuine Mexican plug. Well, I didn't know what a genuine Mexican plug was, really, but I bought it on the advice of a man I later found out was the auctioneer's brother. Well, his tail had been chopped off, or he sat down on it wrong at one time or to other, but anyways, he was proud of it. But this left him only his heels with which to fight off the flies. Well, with some help of some others, some holding his head, some holding his tail, I was able to climb onto that steed, but my feet slipped through the stirrups on the inside. So I was handcuffed at the ankles, and he knew it. So he put his feet together, all of them, in a bunch, lowered his back and fired me 5 feet into the air. And somebody shouted out, "Ho, don't he buck!" Well, I came back down on the saddle, but the laughter this provoked, he took for applause, fired me up again. This time I came down on the high pommel, which was too much variety for me. So I decided to get off. But now he was standing straight up on his hind legs, walking around like a member of Congress. You might think I was afraid, but I wasn't. I knew I could stay on him, so long as his ears did not pull out. Suddenly I was in the air again when I came back down. That genuine Mexican plug was gone. So I dug myself out of the ground and made up my mind that if that auctioneer's brother's funeral was held while I was in Carson City, I would cancel all other recreations and attend it. Well, I didn't have any luck in the mining fields. I soon enough discovered a silver mine weren't nothing but a hole in the ground with a fool at the bottom and a liar at the top. But I did one thing right. I wrote a letter to the editor of the Territorial Enterprise in Virginia City. It was a burlesque of a 4th of July speech that George Turner made. He was our Chief Justice, and he was out stumping the territory at the time. And his speech began, "I was sired by the great American eagle." We'll draw a curtain of charity over the rest of the speech. And I concluded my article by stating, "I cannot complete this essay, for the type cases will have run out of capital I's. And I called that little squib Professor Personal Pronoun. Signed, Josh. Yes, Josh. I was looking for a nom de guerre cognomen. Once before I had used E Panamundus Adrastus Blab. Didn't sound so good. So sometime later I took Thomas Jefferson Snodgrass. That didn't sound so good either. But on the strength of that letter, Professor Personal Pronoun, signed Josh, I was offered a job as a reporter at the Territorial Enterprise at $25 a week. And Joe Goodman, the publisher, told me when I signed on, Sam, you have but one responsibility here. Get your facts straight. Then you can distort them as much as you like. So we never let the truth stand in the way of a good story back then. No, I learned in Virginia City a good lie can travel twice around the globe before the truth gets its boots on. Oh yes, which is not to say we were trying to foist an untruth off on an unsuspecting public, no. Our little quaints were obvious sagebrush humor, and Nevada was founded on tall tales. We had three kinds of stories back then. We had stretchers that stretched the truth a little beyond the horizon of fact. Lifters that would actually lift the furniture. And powder burners. Here lately, I've stopped lying altogether since the amateurs have taken over the field. Speaking of liars, every now and again, old Ray Turner would get comfortably and sociably drunk and tell the story of his grandfather's old ram. But to mention the old ram in the first sentence was as far as any man ever heard him get, for he always meandered off interminably from one thing to another till his whiskey got the best of him. Here's how it sounded. There never was a bullier old ram than he was. Grandfather fetched him from Illinois, from a galoot by the name of Filkins. I just remember his first name. But he was a stump, that Filkins. He was a deacon, Baptist. He was a cattle rustler, too. Fella had to get up rather early to get the jump on old Filkins. And he married a Smith. Mighty fine family, them Smiths. Not a Sacramento Smith. No, this was an Indiana Smith. Them Sacramento Smiths is nobodies. And Grandfather got that old ram all fenced in. And he dropped a 10-cent piece there in the grass. And he was a-stooping over, looking for that 10-cent piece, when the ram noticed him in that attitude and took it for an invitation. But Grandfather didn't notice the ram, and here he come, busting off the ridge with business in his eye. No, it wasn't a Smith, it was a Jefferson is what it was. Now, old Miss Jefferson, there was a good soul, had a glass eye and used to lend it to old Miss Wagner, who hadn't any, to receive company in. But it weren't big enough. Miss Jefferson had a number 7 and Miss Wagner was excavated for a 14. So when Miss Wagner weren't noticing, why, it would get twisted around in the socket, look up maybe out to one side, every which ways. Whilst the other one was looking straight ahead as a spyglass. Oh yes, one little wink in that handmade eye would lay over it. Well, grown people didn't mind it, but it mostly always made the children cry. She tried packing it in raw cotton, but it didn't seem to work. Somehow the cotton would get loose and stick out and look so kind of awful that children couldn't stand it. She was always dropping it out and turning up her old dead light on the company empty and making everybody so uncomfortable. Because she didn't know when it hopped out, being blind on that side, you see. So somebody'd have to hunch her and say, Your game eyes fetch loose, Miss Wagner, dear. Then they'd all have to sit and wait till she jammed it back in again, wrong side out as a general thing. But wrong side out didn't make much difference, really, because the glass eye was sky blue on the front side and gilded on the back side. So when Miss Wagner would get excited, why, it would begin to whirl, and it would flash yeller and blue and yeller. No, it weren't a Jefferson. It was a Hagedorn, is what it was. Now, Sarah Hagedorn, there was a woman. She could have to barrel a flour faster than I can flip a flapjack. And she was friends with Lem, my cousin Lem. And Lem was uptown one day with his dog. What was that dog's name? And Lem was leaning up against a scaffold and drunk or sick or something. There was an Irishman up on the second floor with a hod full of bricks. That Irishman's foot slipped, down he come, bricks and all. Lit on a perfect stranger. Knocked the living aspirations right out of him. It was an accident, they said. Well, there ain't no such thing as an accident that don't have the divine hand of providence to it. And the object of that providence was to save the Irishman. For if the stranger hadn't have been there, the Irishman had have been killed. So then you might want to ask, if it was providence, why weren't the dog appointed? Well, for a very good reason. The dog would have seen him coming. You can't appoint a dog to a special providence. What was that dog's name? And I had an uncle got himself killed up here once. It was just awful. The poor man never had any insurance, and he was always sorry about it afterwards. It was on the 4th of July, and this uncle of mine, all full of patriotism, opened his mouth to hurrah, and a rocket went right down his throat. Well, before he had a chance to ask for a glass of water to quench the thing, it blew up. And for 24 hours it rained buttons recognizable as his. Well, a man cannot have an experience like that and be entirely cheerful for the rest of his life. What was that dog's name? There was a fellow went to see that Dr. Tushmaker up in Virginia City to have his tooth out. Dr. Tushmaker was very good at his craft. He used to practice pulling teeth on iron rakes. Well, the patient came in and sat in a chair. The dentist pulled and the tooth wouldn't come. But the patient's right foot come up. The dentist said, "What are you doing that for?" He said, "I don't know, I can't help it." "Well, then you go home, come back in a week, I'll take care of you." During the week, old Dr. Tushmaker, he invented an instrument combining the properties of the screw, the lever, the wedge, the hammer, and the inclined plane. Well, the patient came back and sat in the chair. One turn of the crank and out came that tooth. Its roots were hooked under the patient's right big toe. And his entire skeleton was extracted with the tooth. They had to send him home in a pillowcase. Well, no matter, old Dr. Tushmaker, he got a patent on that instrument, yes, as a turkey deboner. I don't suppose we ever will find out what happened to grandfather's old ram. Well, I might have stayed longer than my 21 months at the Enterprise, yes, but for a fellow by the name of Laird, James Laird, he was editor for the competition, the Daily Union. Imagine, we had 4 daily newspapers up there back then. We were larger than Los Angeles at the time. And this fellow Laird, perhaps you've known someone like him in your lifetime, but he was endowed with a stupidity that with the slightest stretch would wrap 4 times around the globe and tie. And he slandered my good name in his newspaper. Well, if you must know, he called me a liar, a poltroon, and a puppy. I slandered him back in the Enterprise. This went back and forth 2 or 3 days until I had to call him a coward and challenge him to a duel, which was imprudent. Well, I wore a sidearm, yes, but that was only so as not to be conspicuous. I didn't know how to shoot one. And even if I did, I couldn't hit a tent from the inside. But my friend Gillis knew how to fire. So Gillis and I went out to the appointed spot for the duel out at 6 Mile Canyon a half hour early to practice. And Gillis was such a good shot that he took the head off a mud hen just as Laird came riding up on his pony. And Gillis was quick enough to hand me that smoking sidearm and say, "Nice shot, Sam. Don't kill him. Just shoot his nasty face off." Well, Laird heard that. He did twice around on his pony and off he went. But I was not far behind, for Governor Nye issued a warrant for my arrest for dueling, which had just been made illegal in Nevada. So I decamped for San Francisco to be unemployed. Coldest winter I ever spent in my life was a summer in San Francisco. When I laid down my pen at the Territorial Enterprise, I had 4 horse whippings and 2 duels owing to me. And yet when I said goodbye to the great state of Nevada, I knew I was saying goodbye to the most vigorous enjoyment of life I would ever be afforded. Those days were full to the brim with the wine of life, and there have been no others like them. Professor Green.
Mr. Twain, would you mind taking questions?
No.
No, you would not mind, or no, you will not.
If I don't have an answer, at least I'll have an opinion.
Please show your hand if you wish to ask.
I had a 7th grade boy ask me, I travel across this great land of ours in our schools, and I had a 7th grade boy ask me, "Mr. Twain, who was president when you were my age?" Well, I knew when I was your age. Look it up in the library, why don't you?
When you took the job at the Territorial as Josh, did you continue with that name, or did you at that point go to Mark Twain?
When I signed on, I did sign on as Josh, but we used to go over to the corner saloon for a restorative to sweeten the bilge waters a little. And old John Piper had the corner saloon. He was a very gracious proprietor. He had a board behind the bar. It was a chalkboard. And on occasion, he'd mark a credit for his favorite customers, which I'm proud to say I was one. These were days before the Internal Revenue Service or record keeping of any consequence, or even coin. We dealt in, or currency rather, we dealt in coin, silver mostly, some gold. And it got to be such a good thing that no sooner would I walk through those swinging doors of the corner saloon with one of my drinking companions than a regular would shout out, "Mark Twain!" And John Piper would mark 2 on the board behind the bar. So now you know the truth, the unvarnished truth.
What got you so interested in Jonah Arc.
Joan of Arc. Why was I so interested in Joan of Arc? Because she is the most remarkable person of either persuasion since you can fill in the blank. My daughter Susie, who would have been the writer in the family, that light had gone out. So you will see my daughter Susie and my wife Olivia in my Joan of Arc. Yeah. That same 7th grade boy asked me if I knew the last words that Joan of Arc ever said. I said, no, son, I don't. Actually, I'm sorry, I don't. What were they? He said, is it hot in here or is it just me?
Next question.
Yes.
You gotta love those 7th graders.
Mr. Twain, what provoked you to have interest in adopting Hawaii as an imperialist move early on? What did you see about Hawaii that you wanted America to become a part of America?
I can answer that question. One particularly lovely day on Maui, I observed a bevy of naked native ladies bathing in the ocean. Well, this was the sort of local color I was looking for the Sacramento Union. So I went down and sat on their clothes. Well, to keep them from being stolen. The sea was rising. It was a dangerous situation. I shouted for them to come out, but they continued frolicking in the sea. It was a heartwarming sight. When I got up to go, I noticed my horse was asleep, which goes to show you there is a difference between a man and a horse. You cannot depend upon a horse to gather news for the Sacramento Union.
Please, I see a hand.
On your trip out to the West, you were very anxious to get to the Great Salt Lake Basin. And one of the reasons was you wanted to investigate the Mormon woman. Could you explain what you discovered?
All right. By and by, we reached the Great Salt Lake, home of the prophets, capital of the only absolute monarchy in America, Great Salt Lake City. This was a healthy place. They had but one physician, and he was arrested regularly and held to answer under the Vagrancy Act for having no visible means of support. Well, he had 2 patients while we were there. One was a horse. The other was a sailor. He asked him, "What's the matter with you?" He said, "I don't know, but I'm a sailor." So he treated him for that. I've never seen a man die a more peaceful death. We had but 2 days in Salt Lake, so there was not time to mount the Inquisition and bring to the attention of the nation the workings of polygamy. Oh, I had the will to do so. Yes, I was feverish to plunge in headlong here and bring about a reform until I saw the Mormon women. And I realized that the man who married one of them had done an act of Christian charity. But a man who married 60 of them had done a deed of such generosity that all nations should worship him in silence. Oh, Brigham Young had 110 children in the house. A friend stopped by the house one day, gave one of the children a tin whistle. Brigham had to rush out and purchase 109 more. Then the adults were confined to talking on their fingers entirely until the children grew weary of the whistles. And the bedroom, imagine all 72 of those wives snoring at the same time, while the roar was deafening, and the danger of it. For if they were all to draw their breath in at once, you could actually see the walls of the building suck in. No, 10 or 11 wives is sufficient. Never take more. Before leaving Salt Lake, I was challenged by a Mormon elder. He said, "Well, Clemens, I reckon you cannot cite one passage in the good book that disallows polygamy." But that was easy. No man can serve two masters. I'm sorry about that.
What other Nevada newspapers did you work for?
David Toll started up the Gold Hill News a few years back after 50 years of silence. And the first banner headline said, "Mark Twain never worked here." I have a copy of it. I even had a t-shirt made that says that. But no, our little quaints were obvious sagebrush humor. And we were proud, Dan DeQuill and I. He was my roommate, as Dr. Green made mention. And a better writer than I. He once described the countryside around Virginia City. He said, "The granite cropping out through the sagebrush is like the bones of a land sticking out through its rags." I like that. I merely stated the countryside looked something like a singed cat. But no, the Territorial Enterprise was the paper of record, and I was so proud, and still am, to have been a part of that wonderful collection of people. It's being restored right now. They have a new owner, and I would guess if you give it about 6 months, you'll want to go down to the basement and see that old Washington press that came around the horn, and some of the ledgers and desks that are down there still from the 1860s. And you must ride that B&T railroad. It's all refurbished now and rejuvenated and faster. It was so slow in my day, they transported a prisoner from Virginia City to Carson, and by the time they got him there, he had aged so they could no longer identify him. They had to let him go. It was so slow they took the cow catcher off the front of the train and moved it around to the backside. Well, they knew they couldn't catch any cows, but they were afraid one might try to climb on from behind and bite the passengers.
Why did you leave Virginia City to go to greener pastures and all that?
Well, Dr. Green, I think I might have answered that as far as I want to go with it. Previously with my duel with Laird. That gave me legs. Yeah.
There is someone over there. I'll get there. I promise I will. Where was the hand? I thought it was yours.
Yes. Although I find your monologues very contemporary, what would you think of, if you were here and alive today, what would you think of the presidential administration?
Well, I'm glad you asked, because I don't vote for politicians. It only encourages them. Well, look at it. Look how difficult it is today to find a politician with ethics high enough and morals high enough that he will stay bought.
You know, my mother always said that's why she wouldn't vote, and I didn't know she'd stolen it from you.
I may have missed the answer to this question. You told a story, and I want to know the name of the dog.
Jasper.
questions? Is there a hand up over there and I'm not seeing it? There, I see a finger. Happily not the, finger, the fickle finger of fate. That's a show you never got to watch.
Yes, I understand there was a problem in your travels to Europe about a couple of skulls that two different cathedrals had. I believe they were of John the Baptist. Could you explain how you solved that problem?
Yes, in fact, isn't it interesting? There's a little piece of Nevada that goes back to that. In Genoa, the Reeses started a little truck farm there and hostelry, and a lot of folks stopped there. In fact, it's the oldest settlement in Nevada, down there in Genoa. And the Reeses were so proud of Columbus and Genoa, that they named the town after the birthplace of Christopher Columbus. And when they got their hotel finally built, they put on display a skull of Columbus. And it was such an attraction that they put on display in another room of the hostelry a skull of Columbus when he was a boy. And so we became the state of attractions, thanks to what you just mentioned. Thank you.
Are there other questions for Mr. Twain? I do believe it's time for Mr. Layne to come out then.
Oh no.
And do you have questions for the scholar of Mark Twain?
Oh, good.
How did you come to start doing Mark Twain?
Well, I think I got a tap on the shoulder. I was snowbound at Lake Tahoe for 5 days alone in a cabin. And I thought it was the worst stroke of luck that ever befell anybody in the history of mankind. So I threw darts for 2 days, and then my elbow gave out. And I sat down, and on the coffee table was the complete essays of Mark Twain. My brain was soft then, I had cabin fever. And in that condition, those essays made perfect sense. And that seed was planted in fertile ground. And the next thing I knew, fast forwarding a little, our State Department was sending me to Europe to work in our schools. And I get an invitation from Russia to lecture at Leningrad University and climb in Sputnik 2 and ride around Russia. Oh my gosh, all because I got trapped in a cabin at Lake Tahoe. How lucky is that? Wow.
Do you change the focus of your presentations? I mean, it's suitable for this audience, what you did today, but obviously there are tons of stories.
I'm not sure.
Do you change your focus of your presentation for different audiences, or do you do the same one?
Oh, do I change you for a different audience? If you had been bussed in here and given free drinks, you would hear a couple dirty golf stories and no Mark Twain.
We have time. Others?
Well, I'm going to go have a drink to you all.
Well, first you're going to have one more question.
All right, one more question, then I'm going to have a drink to you all.
As a performer, do you have other characters besides Mark Twain?
Can you repeat that?
Are there other characters you do besides Mark Twain?
I am such awe of the three Chautauquans we've seen already today, that they can do other people like that. It is beyond my wildest dreams. Honestly, it's such a talent times 10, or 14, or 16, I think. Oh my gosh. But I can only dream about it. I'm an educator in a costume. I'm not an actor. I couldn't be anybody else. But I'm comfortable in this old white suit until I get called home. So now can I know there are 1,000 reasons why I shouldn't take a drink, but I can't think of one right now. But I just want to say thank you to Boulder City, thank you for your Chautauqua, and have a good life. Thank you very much.